Sales development continues to grow in importance as a critical component of a successful go-to-market strategy. And with the explosion of new tools, technology, and processes, the sales development industry itself is thriving, as seen with the growth of the Tenbound sales development market map over at tenbound.com. On this podcast, we'll dive deep and go beyond sales development to think about the future of technology, processes, and tools in the industry with our host, noted futurist, author, and sales development practitioner, Justin Michael. Welcome to Beyond Sales Development. Tune in each week and be sure to hit subscribe, leave a comment, and turn on notifications to never miss an episode. And now, Beyond Sales Development with your host, Justin Michael.
Welcome to Beyond Sales Development. I'm here with the incomparable Nikki Ivey, who is an SDR leader and quite humble and has a lot of great tactics and tips. So Nikki, welcome to the show.
Hi, Justin. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here talking to you today, and I'm a fan of a lot of your content. And most importantly, I nerd out on sales development stuff. So this should be fun.
I'm a fan of sales development. I'm also a fan of Star Wars, and you blew my mind with your knowledge of it and theories about the plot. So we might get into that piece. I actually interviewed someone on here, and they were in their mom's basement with a giant cutout of Han Solo and Darth Vader behind them.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So talk to me about this. Like, how have you gotten into sales development? Like, what does it mean to you? If you could just kind of share the company you're working on. I know you also have SDR Defenders. That's pretty cool. Just get us up to speed if you can, please.
Yeah. So I've been in, sales proper for more than 10 years now. And I've worked in, retail environments. B2B is relatively recent in my career. I guess it's only the second half has been in B2B tech. But the common thread in all of that has been, what you can do with effective communication and copywriting skills to set yourself apart, even if you don't have, some, big money education behind you, even if you don't have a lot of experience. People say the barrier for entry to sales is low. I would challenge that. I don't think it's necessarily, and I've said this myself before as well, so I would challenge myself. It's not that it's low necessarily. It does step outside of this traditional box of what you have to have in order to be successful and what you can make out of nothing. So, a girl gets a hold of that and you kind of just don't let it go. So that's why I've stayed. The recent stuff, the real sales development stuff that I've been into lately happened kind of by accident. I was out of work and just kind of playing around on LinkedIn, and I got this message. And I'm taking you guys back like 3 roles ago. I was online and I got this message from James Carberry at Sweetfish Media. And, he had just posted about a role that they had opening up for, it was essentially an SDR role, but it was so different because it was also hosting the B2B Growth podcast. And I thought, okay, like how does that work? Am I making calls and then doing interviews anyway? So I went immediately and just researched and read everything I could about what they do. And at like 1:00 in the morning or something, I send James Carberry this just really enthusiastic voice memo in Messenger. And I'm like, it's 1:00 in the morning. I'm thinking about sales. So there's all you really know about me. But I was like, I love everything that I could possibly consume about you guys. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you. And at that point I didn't have the interview yet. So of course he calls the phone screen person and is like, we need to talk to this girl. Anyway, so first of all, the way that I did that interview process, right? The way that I used LinkedIn voice memos and the way that cut through, and this is not that long ago, it was only last April, but nobody was doing it. So I'm already cluing in to how these sort of outside of the box channels to get a hold of people are cutting through. Anyway, so the job ends up being interviewing people for the podcast and then seeing if it makes sense to have a conversation about okay, so you're on this podcast, you like podcasts, you're pursuing thought leadership and brand awareness. And we kind of agree that this works. We produce podcasts for B2B brands. You should probably have another conversation. And that was it. that was it. So I was getting to talk to people about what they love, what's important to them, what they're passionate about when it comes to B2B revenue, and then help them get the larger message about the problems that they were solving out to their prospects and customers. And so it's this concept of what they call content-based networking. And it just was like, oh, there's no video, so you guys can't see. I just did like the brain explosion gesture.
I may re-release all these with the videos someday on Tenbound, so it's up to Dave Delaney. But it's interesting. One, I'm totally sold on the concept. I loved the passion and the way you just described cutting-edge, innovative tactic, which really kind of showed your innovation. I remember, well, first, I know James Carberry through Ben Sardella back at Outbound Works, a small world there. When I applied to LinkedIn, it was the same way. They saw how I looked for warm introductions and how I personalized and the approach. And they're like, your approach is really interesting. Let's talk about that. So now that you've been in these roles and you've been looking at content-based networking, which is totally innovative, and innovative channels, right? Mm-hmm. I like Morgan Ingram, really, I started to go out there looking for video messaging. He has the 10-30-10 framework. Then I met people from BombBomb who've sent 5,000 video messages. Blows my mind. And then this other guy comes in and goes, I sent 10,000 video messages. I was like, we got to talk. I want to know what you're finding. So I'm sure the listeners would love to hear what you're innovating on now. It doesn't have to be tech stacks. It could be an approach. And it could be simple. It could be a return to classic themes.
It's all of those things. But I'll try and keep it narrow. So in March, my contract ended at 6 Sense, where I was the social marketing manager. But a really cool thing about that role was that's where I was working with the BDR team, sort of running like a top of funnel recon. So if they had some CMO who was active on social, but not answering their emails, I'd be like, where's the in? What if I just listen a little bit? If I follow, this CMO that you're trying to break through to, and I see some cool nugget to personalize around, or some opportunity to get in there and cut through, then as I'm doing my work as a marketer, right, I'm also going to be able to, create sort of a feedback loop with the BDR team. And, we didn't get as far as I wanted to, as far as like, let's really be intentional about this. Let's make a target list and give it to me. And while I'm just out doing my work on social, we'll see what we can pull from it. But I was able to, from a top of funnel social role, to source actual deals, to like put stuff in the pipeline. And that just doesn't happen. And so when the contract ended, and I was, during COVID, I only recently, took a new role like just a couple weeks ago, right? So during that time, how do I stay sharp? How do I not, just lay in bed and loathe and sulk? I find new things. And so I didn't have access to a lot of the tech that I was using when I was in these previous roles to sort of execute and play with these strategies and see how I could affect pipeline from top of funnel even before it got to, what an SDR would do. And so that's what led me to get creative. And I started using video apps. Like there's one called Ripple, where you can make like a video. It's like a short little video quote post almost. But what I was doing is I would go on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I'd find something, sort of the same process that a person would go through if they were researching, doing the research step as an SDR, right? Like finding the nuggets that you're going to personalize around. Yeah. And instead of putting whatever this quote was, right? Let's say the person I'm trying to reach out to said something that I found interesting. Instead of putting that in an email and saying, hey, you said XYZ and it resonated with me, I made like a little social quote post for them that made them look like famous, made them look cool, and left no doubt as to whether or not I was paying attention, and made use of these, marketing skills. And I didn't consider myself a creator even before I took the role at 6 Sense. But I was like, all right, I got no money. These apps are free. What can I do with them? And so there was this Crunchbase list that came out. A bunch of folks that I follow made the list. And I just made them cute little social posts and tagged them in it on Twitter. And all of them retweeted it, added me, thanked me personally. So it made it to a couple of folks, even from Twitter, it made it into their Instagram stories, right? And so I'm like, wow, why aren't we empowering, right? First, why aren't we teaching this to SDRs and then empowering them to take their top of funnel stuff, even, more top of funnel, and in a counterintuitive way, right? That's actually the more intimate, genuine connection that's available when you compare it to what I could have done with that same personalization nugget to those same people in email or even a phone call.
I love it. I have been taking notes. The Ripple app, so already top of funnel Recon. I mean, I'm a writer, so what I love is when people come up with like new terms. So content based networking, top of funnel Recon, listening, and then on the listening using these awesome free app tools to go out and, be a creator, create content, and then tag people in a way that celebrates them, that really gets you noticed. So first of all, like no one is doing any of that. So it's been a surprise and delight just to get on the episode. I'm taking notes, and I just actually got a notepad, so I probably would always take notes, but those stick out to me. I've never heard of all three of those strategies. Take me forward, like the next few years, where you see sales development going, either kind of what your plans are and where you see the technology and the approach. Because here's the problem I'm having. If I have to get in front of a C-level decision maker or someone who signs the check, and we have all this hyper personalization, well, everyone's going to get better and the tech's going to get better, and it's going to be harder and harder to be different. Or maybe I just need to make movies. Like Ryan O'Hara at Lead IQ was like, make a Super Bowl ad for one person. And it kind of fits in with what you're saying here. So
yes.
Two questions baked into that.
I think the future of sales development must be, right? And this is, full disclosure, coming from a person who is an unapologetic advocate of SDRs, right? Even the ones that send the bad emails, even the ones that cold call you and you think, did this person learn, did they just get off the bus, right? Yes, I'm an advocate for those people too, because all of us were in a position before where we just literally got off the bus. It's our first day of school. We know nothing. And I have a high level of empathy for that. But what's started to happen during this time when a lot of us had been out of work and sort of figuring out how we stay, not even to stay relevant, but like how we survive this climate. Some really wonderful things have been pulled out of people. And some of the most exciting examples of that are SDRs. Take someone like Andre McBride, who just accepted his role on the SDR team at Gong, right? This is a person who was showing up in all the micro communities. He then started to create content around just his own journey, his own experience in looking for a role to break into B2B. And now what he brings with him in just the short amount of time that he took to build any following or brand, what he brings with him to Gong can only impact their bottom line. Like if he keeps that up. So where I'd like to see the future go is we take this, not necessarily the power dynamic, but we take some of the cultural things that have been not so respectful to SDRs, right? Despite the bulk of the pipeline that they create, despite the fact that they, at most companies, they're the heart of the culture. They galvanize the sales floor. Everybody supposedly loves them, but they're not often getting a lot of the respect that they should be getting. But if we take Sarah Brazier before him and then Andre McBride as an example, if you take me, I'm an SDR at M-Train. If we take me as an example and we look at what is the capital that these people are bringing with them, that they now, while wearing the banner of whatever this organization is, how powerful is that compared to just people doing nothing at all, right, on social? And I don't mean just LinkedIn, I mean Twitter, all of that. So what I'd like to see the future is just something short of influencers when we look at how SDRs impact sales culture and how SDRs impact the bottom line. But just taking that same model that Sarah Brazier did and that Andre's doing, that I'm doing, and scaling it. Because what I thought previously was, well, it's easy for someone, if I work at a Gong, right, and it's a big enough brand, and they're already, salespeople selling to salespeople, then I can talk about what I do as a salesperson and still be talking to folks who might be my prospects. But I mean, if I sell into construction, then someone who's in that field who I want to sell to comes to my LinkedIn and sees me just talking about what a good salesperson I am. Well, then it doesn't work. So it wasn't a really democratized opportunity there when we look at, what someone like Sarah could do as an SDR and what someone not selling into B2B salespeople could do. But if we develop that, if we just think about, okay, well, why not? And we start to talk about how to empower your SDRs to engineer their audiences, right? That is, pay attention to who they're adding on LinkedIn and how they're building that audience, and have that match up as directly as it possibly can to your target accounts list, to your ICP. Like, I'm talking actual names of contacts and accounts, as many as you possibly can. If they're doing that right, and then they just start to talk about the industry, or at the idea level, start engaging these people, and then these SDRs start to stand for or be symbols of what is possible, not necessarily with that tool, but with whatever the philosophy is behind the tool, whatever the spirit is behind the problem that you're trying to solve and your approach to it, then there'll be no more question about whether or not SDR should be respected. There'll be no more question about whether or not SDR should be allowed to be on, LinkedIn or build their brand. It'll just make sense. And I hope that that's where it goes.
I love that. That was an amazing response, and so eloquent and so passionate. I think the second piece of that was, where do you see your journey? Do you think you will stay on the opening track, which is now a new track? You can actually be an SDR and then an SDR leader and an SDR thought leader. You don't have to become an AE. You can become a VP of sales development. There are new roles opening up for folks that enjoy, the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
So you think that's your journey?
Yeah.
And, in Sarah's case, right, she is now an account executive. And I think they're both very valid. And I think we just need respect for however people contribute. Certainly, every CEO, if they really think back, started with the cold calls, right? Like even that famous Steve Jobs story where he's like a kid and he calls Hewlett Packard about his computer club. That started it all. I think he talked to one of the founders or some wild story. So do you think you'll stay in sales development?
Yeah, I think I will. It's so funny when you mention that. I think of a lot of the scenes from, sort of the sales movies and the sales lore. All of the scenes that people love the most, it's typically a person doing a sales development function. And I don't think that that's an accident, because there is something very magical about not changing someone's mind necessarily, right? But making that connection where they see you and you see them. You may not agree on whatever comes next, but you've taken this whole situation and transformed it and made it something so human. I think we talk about sales development. A lot of time we're talking about technology, but no, at the heart of it is people connecting with people. That's the skill. That's the talent. But for me in the immediate sense, I'd like to be leading a team of SDRs at M-Train whom I have had a hand in selecting and ramping and making them, helping them become the best that they're going to be. Beyond that, it's big. And I don't even know what the how is at this point. I just know that I want to be impacting sales culture in a meaningful and lasting way. And where I see the opportunity, the biggest opportunity to do that is to affect the way people are treated and welcomed into the profession to begin with. So that's another dimension of why sales development appeals to me. It's not just the job itself. It's the potential to shape folks, right? Because so much of what's wrong with sales culture, what's broken in salespeople, has to do with, their sales childhood, so to speak, right? So they have all these traumatic experiences from when they were younger and then in their sales career. And then rather than avoid those things, we end up acting these things out and hurting people the way that we were hurt in terms of these toxic elements of the culture. And, again, I'm empathetic to this. And so no part of me wants to just, wag my finger at, folks who do that, who perpetuate those kinds of cultures. Just want to get more people into the profession that didn't have that experience so we can heal and make money and impact change.
I have no doubt you'll be successful doing just that, because it's interesting when I talked with Sarah, just to link there, I think I interviewed her yesterday even, she talked about specificity, and why I'm linking that here is you're articulating something that you're doing, right? When I talk to a lot of folks, it's kind of like, well, there's emails and calls and how many emails and how many calls, and there's this measurement of stuff we do, but articulating like micro communities and content strategies and apps, it's like, I think your voice is very powerful to empower the function, but also articulate the, okay, now what? I'm fired up. okay, I guess I'll just make more calls and emails, right? It's like, we need to get out of the box, right? I can imagine your future team being almost like a record label or like a awesome channel on HBO where there's like great content, because each person is a fusion of their personal brand and the company brand. And I remember there's some high profile cases early in social media where someone, big company, I won't name it, it's very famous, literally just tweets and then they're like out of the company. Companies have changed a lot in the last 5 years. They're letting the salespeople get out there and are pretty comfortable with it on LinkedIn. Like, I knew Scott Leese 5 years ago, and there was no, Patreon or Slack community. Like, it's weird. We're all like race car drivers now. It's like, well, how do you get 100 meetings? Well, so where's that piece going? I think did you work with Scott? I'm curious who you follow, and is that prediction on my part accurate?
I do think that prediction is accurate. And as far as who I follow, I can be a fan just like everybody else. So a lot of the people the names that you would know are, that I would say are names that you would know. But the difference for me is I've had personal experience, like met them in person or worked with them personally. So I'll start with Dale Dupree.
Cool. I love his vibe, and his branding is like an 80s race car driving game or like Miami Vice.
Right. It's so good. So I was acquainted with all of that. And, I think he's friends they both live in Orlando. So I think he's friends with James Carberry. So I knew of him and started following his content. And I really dig. He's a Star Wars fan, and I dig all of the Rebel talk. But, we had never met, and I didn't, at that point, it wasn't anything different from just, following influencer or thought leader on LinkedIn. But I was getting ready to go to this conference. This is all just before, the wrecking ball that is COVID changed everyone's plans. But I was going to this, the Selling Power conference in Orlando. And I made this post on LinkedIn, like, hey, I'm going to be out there. Anybody want to say hi? And Dale was like, yeah, that's my, part of town or whatever. So he was super nice, met up with me. We went and had dinner together, and we had this conversation where there was just no veneer. There was no, here's my sales face type thing. And once I met him, I instantly knew that wasn't even ever a possibility, right? He's just a real person. And so for me, I like more folks to have access to those other dimensions of people. And I know for a fact now that we would never get those on LinkedIn. It's why I encourage young sales folks to be on Twitter and be in the communities. But so I was fortunate there. Of course, Scott Leese, you guys can't see that in video, but on audio, but his book's right behind me on my bookshelf. Always addicted to the process. So, and he is someone that I worked with and know personally, and has been instrumental. And I can't lie, in a lot of the opportunities that I've gotten. And so beyond that, there's folks you don't know. There's a gentleman named, or you may not know, there's a gentleman named Frank Cole, who for a long time led business development at Accruent, but who was also the first person to hire me for a job when I first moved to Austin. And I was a real tough case. I'm not going to lie. I was not a diva. It was actually quite the opposite. So one element, we were selling into multifamily housing, right? A company is called Court Furniture, and they furnish corporate housing and events and all of this. And so part of the job was to make phone calls. I had been doing a lot of retail stuff and had never really made cold calls before this. And I would request to be put like in a little cubicle in the back because I was just so terrified of anyone hearing me talk on the phone, because I was certain that I sounded like a goober. Sorry, F word. So I was convinced that I sounded like a goober, and he loved me through that. He would have been well within his rights to just say this. She's not cut out for it. How can you be so effervescent as in person and then be so afraid on the phone? I don't even want to put this puzzle together. He would have been within his rights to do that to me, but he didn't. He coached and supported and guided and loved me through that experience, and is still a dear friend and mentor of mine. I don't know. I forgot even what the question was. But
I forgot the question too. I love this show because I bring people on that are just have really interesting viewpoints about it, And I love how you just described that. I remember being a rep, my first ever job. I was 21. And it was you read a 9-minute script and you take a credit card. And I read it 100 times and I didn't get a credit card. And I'm I am bad at this job. And I was ready to quit. But yeah, that period, I had some cool trainers who I'm in touch with to this day that showed me that I could work on it and kind of optimize what it is.
You asked the question, and I want to. So you asked about like what it was like working with Scott.
Yeah.
There's a thing that he did when I was at Outbound Engine, which was, yes, my first B2B sales job. And I don't see other people doing it. And I really think that they should. And especially in this remote environment. I'll start out with saying, so part of the reason why people aren't doing this method or this practice so much is because things like gong and chorus mean that they really don't necessarily have to. But so when I started, and that was an ISR, because that was just what we called sales development back then. When I started at Outbound Engine, one of the most helpful things was Scott had recorded himself. He'd recorded himself delivering the rebuttals to the objections, because he understood how important, how critical it is not to just say the right words, but to say them with the right tone and cadence. And it's really difficult to teach someone the right tone and cadence without just demonstrating it for them.
So true.
And the fact that it came from the person who actually wrote the script and wrote the rebuttals was even more powerful. And on a psychological level for me, I'm like, wow, this person's the VP of sales of this company, which will not be the first exit, that he has. So there's no reason why he should even care this much, but it's probably precisely because he cared that much that he was successful. So I remember just sitting there, and it's so weird, but listening to Scott Lisa's voice deliver these rebuttals, just the way that he asked the questions. And it was so helpful. So when I think about how I'll run my own SDR team, and one of the sort of tools in my toolkit, that's one I cannot wait to use. I cannot wait to not just give them a piece of paper and a script that says, hey, here's how you deliver this that's going to be effective, or even point them to, the SDRs before you got here were making these calls so you can listen to their calls. No. I'm the one who crafted these messages. Here is their intended purpose. And let's treat learning that skill separate from the way that we treat learning the skill of how to navigate the conversation in real time, because I believe they're two very different things. I don't know why he doesn't talk about that very much, because I just think it was lights out. I was like, there's no question. So there was that, and a tool we don't much use anymore, where it was whispering is what it was called. So our headsets are connected, and, I'm on a call, and in real time, and there's a gentleman named Roosevelt Hawkins, who was, Rose, but
I don't. I remember the era of splicing into headsets and like listening in and giving
yes.
I used to sit
so Roosevelt.
I was just nodding my head.
Oh my God. So to have Rose on like my first week live making calls at Outbound Engine, and it's like you get to. I felt like Peter Parker in an Iron Man suit, right?
Yeah.
That's how it felt. So I'm Peter. I got gifts, right? But sometimes you just need to like co-opt somebody else's for a moment for a specific purpose. And so I remember being on the phone, and prospect says something inevitably, right? A part of me freezes up. I wasn't prepared for this, even though I listened to all of Scott Lisa's rebuttals. This is something I wasn't prepared for. And then Rose's voice comes in. First, he's giving me encouragement. He's like, take a deep breath, relax, and say it exactly like this. And then he delivers what to say next. And because I've studied the importance of tone and cadence, no part of me rejects just saying it exactly how he says it. I understand why that's going to work. And then because I've practiced delivering it exactly the way that someone else is saying it, I'm doing it right. And by God, this person is responding. And it was just, and then so to graduate from that to being someone who is now on calls on the other end of it, giving that same encouragement and loading their lip, as they call it in car sales, when you tell another person what to say. I just think it was really magical. And maybe those things are old school, right? Like I said, with the advent of things like gong and chorus, but there's something so intimate and so personal. And I never, wondered how supported I was in that building by those leaders. Never, not once. And it was due in large part to, I guess that's the word, to the way that they heavily invested in training and coaching throughout, and the intimacy with which a lot of that training was enacted.
That was awesome. I love that story. I think we'll get, all the pieces of Scott Lisa's methods the open via his friends and the people he has mentored. So what a legend. And you are definitely on your way to that legendary place because you're so focused on doing it right and putting so much extra effort into it. So it's been a great pleasure to have you on the show. Where do people go to find you and, maybe plug SDR Defenders as well?
Yeah, so we just did an overhaul on our website at SDR Defenders. It's way prettier now. and it's great. Shout out to Nisha, who is one of the 5 founding SDR Defenders, the one who is not a salesperson. She's a marketer, head of marketing, and she's brilliant. And she's literally the backbone of the content and the whole thing, everything that we do. So SDRDefenders.com is a thing. We have our hotline because remember, I believe in, when it comes to coaching, I believe in intimacy. So maybe you're not even allowed to say that as a salesperson anymore, but I do. So, and I studied broadcasting, so I believe in the power of audio. I grew up an Army brat, so the way people speak always because I was jealous that everybody had accents and I didn't. The way people speak, I'm very attuned to it. So I was like, we need a hotline. So the SDR Defenders hotline is 888-563-SDRD. And I'm super excited about it because what we thought about was, okay, we see that there are Slack groups where, SDRs can ask questions and do sort of a knowledge share. You, of course, if you were a particularly enterprising SDR, could go into the inbox of some influencer who you want to ask a question. But how do you circumvent all of that? How do I make a frictionless experience and remove as many barriers as I can between myself and folks who might have questions from me and the other SDR Defenders? So you call, you leave a message, and some of the messages I've responded to with video in this person's inbox answering their questions. Some of them is just an email or just a message. But, and you can certainly tell us how to get back with you. The next horizon of how we'll answer those questions is live on our webinars. So there's a lot on the roadmap for SDR Defenders. The other places you can, so of course, follow us on LinkedIn. The other places you can find me are my BDR breakthrough group on Bravado and on Twitter and Instagram at Nikki Ivey. It's not no as in rejection, as in how to know me. So KNOW Nikki Ivey on Twitter and Instagram.
Thank you so much for being on the show. That is awesome. And we will talk soon.